All right, everybody, we wanted to quickly pop on to give you an update on an incredibly important topic for a number of our customers and users that, most of you are familiar with all the changes coming down in August regarding our settlement. But there's also another critical piece that's taking place regarding compliance and the TCPA regulations that are out there. So we want, in terms of protecting you, we wanted to bring in a subject matter expert. We had the joy of actually attending Eric's Law Conference of Champions. I had met Eric out at a Leads conference out in Vegas several months ago, and he is the guy when it comes to everything related to what is going on in the TCPA world. And so we want to bring him in, update you on where things stand today, knowing that there is a critical deadline in January, which we'll update you on in terms of how you're able to source leads, how you're able to communicate with those leads moving forward. And so, knowing most of our clients, we rely upon good quality lead flow. You're going to want to make sure that you're taking good notes during this session. So our goal is in 30 minutes or less, get you in and out, give you the high level overview. So Eric is with Troutman and Amin LLP. He's a partner there. He is the czar of the industry. And so everything, all the information, everything you need to know, he's got an incredible resource library, both on his YouTube channel, which we'll link to, and both within his blog as well, just so you all can stay in tune with it. So without me speaking too much, Eric, I'm going to turn it over to you. Why don't you quickly give an overview of your firm, and then let's jump into, again, how this impacts our clients and digging in a little bit deeper there. So I'll turn it over to you, Eric.
Yeah, well, first of all, thank you for referring to us as a joy. And usually people call me the czar of the TCPA. You called me the czar of the industry, which, by the way, I like this. I can work with
industry guy now, yeah.
It could be. So, hey, folks, I'm Eric Troutman. As Steve was mentioning, I am the czar of the TCPA. I've been doing nothing but TCPA defense for 15 years now, and I've defended more TCPA class actions than any human being alive. But I also have a team of folks that does a ton of compliance work. We really try to help companies to stay compliant. I'm also the president of an organization called REACH, that's Responsible Enterprises Against Consumer Harassment. This is like one of these organizations that tries to set standards for the lead generation industry to keep that industry clean and safe, but also, not misbehaving and abusing consumers, which frankly it was for a little while there, but we're trying to set that straight. But so big news, right? So you folks out there, if you're listening to me, hopefully you already know there's this thing called the Telephone Consumer Protection Act, the TCPA. And in order to make outreach to consumers, you have to comply with the rules of the TCPA. That's it. That is the law, right, that governs what you're doing when you're trying to communicate with your consumers over the phone. Now, if you knock on the door, you send an email, then the TCPA doesn't apply to you. But if you're making a phone call, you're making a text message, you're leaving voicemails, anything that's over the phone, the TCPA, that is going to be what governs your activity. Now, today, right now, you can, and we're talking, this is July 2024, you can buy a lead, right? And that lead is going to say to the consumer, or to, they come on to a website, say at Realtor or Zillow, whatever, and they're interested in learning about 123 Main Street, and there's a button there, and it says, confirm. And underneath the button, there's going to be some disclosure. The disclosure is going to say, by clicking here, you're agreeing that, some folks can call you about your interest in this property. And there's going to be a hyperlink, and that hyperlink is going to link to, I don't know, maybe hundreds, maybe dozens, maybe thousands of names, and maybe your name is on it, right? Your company's name is on it. And so you will buy that lead, they'll sell it to you, you make that outbound call, no problem, right? That is the law today. The FCC, which is the Federal Communications Commission, is responsible for stopping robocalls in this country. And hopefully everyone knows that many consumers don't want to receive robocalls. And so the FCC has decided that it wants to expand essentially the reach of the TCPA, make it more difficult for small businesses to make outbound calls, because at least the belief is by the commission that consumers don't necessarily want these. Now, my view is that consumers do want them when they actually ask for them. And so the problem isn't preventing small businesses from connecting with consumers, it's stopping really people who are doing inappropriate things in the space. But I digress. The FCC has decided that what they want to see happen is that, unlike the current form that might have thousands of names behind a hyperlink, there has to now be the option for the consumer to choose one at a time, not selecting in bulk, just one at a time, the seller, right, that the individual company that consumer is going to work with for their goods and services. And here in the real estate context, this is very tricky, right? Because there has to only be one name on the form at a time. Now, there could be like 5 names on the form, but they have to have little boxes, right? And the consumer has to be able to individually select each box. And what name has to be on the form is going to depend on how the brokerage, right, in the real estate context is situated. If this is a situation where you've got a franchise, right, it's a franchise, let's say, you can't just have Keller Williams on the form, right? It's got to be Bob's Keller Williams of Delaware, LLC, and Susan's Keller Williams of Tennessee, LLC, has to be on the form. And that consumer has to select specifically that franchise in order for that lead to be viable for that franchise. If that lead says anything else, even if it says, I really, really care about learning and hearing from a broker, and I'm in Kentucky and I want to hear from a broker in Kentucky, it doesn't matter. The entity that is going to provide the good or service has to be on the form and individually selected. Otherwise, that lead is invalid, and you can get sued under the TCPA, which is, of course, $500 per call minimum with a class action, where if you're buying 10,000 bad leads, you're talking about 10,000 times 500 minimum is going to be your statutory exposure there. All right. So that was a franchise model scenario. Yeah. Let's say you're not in a franchise. Let's just say you're in a brokerage model, right? In that instance, because the brokerage, right, is going to be providing the goods or service, now it's no longer the franchise, it's going to be the brokerage. You have to just have the brokerage's name. Now, again, many of these brokerages, let's take EXP. I love EXP, right? EXP has multiple entities, right? So it can't just say EXP on there. It has to say EXP of California, LLC, right? Now, the good news is that if it does say EXP of California, LLC, then all of the agents associated, right, with that broker of record can buy that lead. And so, that's like 10,000, 20,000 agents, right, that just got swept in and can buy that lead. That's great. But again, if you're in the franchise model, it's much trickier because your specific franchise has to be listed in order for that to be acceptable. But even in the EXP scenario, recognize if you're an EXP Florida agent, right, you can't buy a lead if it has the EXP California entity on there, because you've got to be part of the Florida entity in order to, or you have to buy a lead that has the Florida entity on the form in order for it to be valid for you. And in the real estate brokerage context, I guess that kind of makes sense, right? Because pretty rarely is there going to be a California property with a Florida agent that wants to call on it. Maybe it happens, but this is just something to keep in mind. It's a really, really big change.
But if I'm a team that's operating in multiple markets, multiple jurisdictions and states, will now need to work. I'm just thinking the logistical challenges. If I go to Zillow or homes.com and realtor.com, those are kind of the 3 big boys for our realtor partners there. Now on their form, right now today, if you go and read it, it says you're authorizing one of our affiliates to contact you. So in this form now, it's going to be, will it be a hyperlink, or will my face and my likeness be below in terms of just meeting the new standards? And I just am curious about all of the logistical challenges for a lead generation company like that to implement. I'm sure they'll figure it out, but it now, no longer can you have a generalized piece of text, right? You're going to need to have those agents that are paying to play, whether they're in the Flex program or, that's another topic, right? Is how do I, authorize Zillow, and now in the Flex program, right, they're having their own team call me. How do I now, from the Zillow standpoint, hand that off to the local authorized rep? How do I get that one-to-one consent so that, in real estate, our sales cycle isn't 3 weeks, right? It's 6 months to a year or even longer. So right. How do you see that unfolding for those that are out there that are already in that game with the big boys?
Yeah, I'm going to tell you, you got to be really careful. And so there's 2 kind of concepts there, right? One's kind of like the paywall, and then one is the warm transfer. I'm going to talk about the warm transfers first. Yeah. You got to be real careful buying transfers in the new world, right? Because let's say you're a Zillow, you're going to buy a lead from Zillow, and Zillow's team is making the outbound, getting the consumer on the phone, and then getting like some kind of oral permission to pass it over to you. Guess what? That's illegal, right? Your name has to be on the form in the first place if this is going to be an outbound call. Now, you have to keep in mind, these rules are for outbound calling. Inbound calling is different, right? If Zillow can generate a true inbound, right, call to action, consumer calls in, Then Zillow gets them on the phone. They can talk to that consumer and then transfer them wherever. That's not a problem. But if the consumer goes onto a website, right, Zillow.com, I'm interested in hearing from an agent, fills out the form, clicks the button, right? Your name, agent, has to be on that form, or the franchise or the brokerage, as we just talked through, depending on what the structure of your enterprise is, your brokerage, that you have to have the entity that's going to provide the name, the service to the consumer has to be on that form. So if Zillow just has a generalized, Zillow will call you and talk to you about this, and then Zillow calls, even if that consumer's on the phone and Zillow says, hey, do you want to hear from Bob's Keller Williams of Delaware LLC? And the consumer says, sure, that sounds great, right? That transfer over to Bob's, that whole call is illegal now, right? And so Bob just bought liability. He just bought a lawsuit because he can't take on that call. And it might sound like ridiculous, right? The consumer just said, yes, they want to hear from Bob. They signed a form to request a call from Zillow. That's exactly what happened. There's no, like, what's the problem? But the law is very, very strict. And those of you that have dealt with the TCPA before, this law is merciless. And people get sued all the time by these litigators that set up these lawsuits. They'll find a bad form. They'll be like, yeah, I'm interested. Yep, absolutely. Send me over. Let's do it. And they're doing it just to set up a class action. And this is how their money gets made, right? I mean, it's the biggest cash cow in the history of the legal system, millions and millions and millions of dollars. You guys all saw Keller Williams got hit for $40 million last year. And there's a lot more in the pipe. Trust me. And, just literally, what was it, 2 weeks ago, a couple of agents along with the brokerage, the agents were sued personally, right? That's something else to keep in mind. You can be sued personally just because you've got a broker of record, just because you've got a team name. It doesn't matter. Everyone that makes outbound calls can be sued individually. So yeah, you got to be real careful when you're buying those warm transfers. Very, very difficult. Now, so pivoting over now to just like, the paywall scenario. It's interesting because certainly, what the layout's going to look like, the format of these websites is in flux. I'm helping many companies actually to design some websites. I could, some are better at this artistically, right, than others are. But I agree with you, Steve. I could imagine a scenario where, you've got three nice smiling faces right there, and the consumer just picks like, which of these nice looking agents do I want to work with, right? So dust off your photos, folks. I can tell you that. And that's fine. By the way, that's fine, right? If you've got, the agent's like, I want to work with this guy, and clicks that button, and it gets sold off to you, that's great, right? But, from a volume standpoint, that would be a perfectly valid lead. But from a volume standpoint, think about now how much more difficult it's going to be to generate those leads, right? These companies are going to have to work even harder than ever before to get the consumers to convert, right? The good news, though, for lead buyers, right, there's going to be less leads, but these should be pretty good leads, right? I mean, this consumer has literally just seen a picture of your face, clicked on it, and was like, yeah, you're the lady or the man that I want to work with. That's a pretty solid lead, right? You're going to feel pretty good about that. So you're going to have to pay more for it, probably. There's going to be less of them, and you're going to have to pay more for it. But it should convert at a, strikingly high rate, depending on how the website is set up. Now, this is like one example that we're talking through, and there's going to be different examples of how lead flows are set up, and the cost of leads is going to vary, and the quality of leads is going to vary, just like it does today. But I think of like a bell curve, right? Like there's like really bad leads, and like most of them are kind of okay, and then there's like a few that are like really, really good. The whole bell curve is going to shift up, right? The whole bell curve is going to be higher quality leads at a higher cost, right? In the new world, there's still going to be better and worse, right? But it's overall going to be better than it is today for the lead buyer. But again, it's going to be less of them. It's going to be more costly. Now, there is a concern in my mind. There's a concern that if you're in the franchise model, unless you're like a really big team where you can still drive pretty good volume, there's going to be a tendency for the Zillows of the world to be like, yeah, I'm going to just, I can put EXP California on that form and sell to 20,000 agents. No matter how big your team is, I'm putting your name on there. I'm only going to be able to sell to 10 or 15 or 20, right? I'm going to go with 20,000 agents. So I am concerned, kind of looking into the future, that those who are in the franchise model are going to be kind of frozen out of leads potentially. I don't know this, but like it feels like that could happen because any lead provider is going to want to put names on the form that is going to give them the best opportunity to sell that lead as many times as they can, right? So it's a really kind of fascinating thing. It's going to take a little time for this to play out, but it's definitely something to keep an eye on.
That's fascinating. I mean, we hit it when they're, it'll be interesting to see how that does all unfold. The, one question, I mean, a lot of what I'm hearing though, right? You're taking the stance. I mean, if our listeners are thinking about this, it's all driven based on, a consumer experience, right? So all of the changes that are taking place, it may hurt a little bit, right? It may be sounding of the alarms of like, man, my operations are going to be impacted significantly. Look at no further than Agent Legend. What our job is to help you engage and nurture those leads that are coming in. Some of our users were in the volume category, and now you're going to see a steer towards higher quality, maybe a higher cost per lead. Conversion rates will still be there. So when you're looking at your ROI, the goal is still that, well, it's going to all pan out in the end. And now it is, what can you be doing today? So I heard a couple of things I want to unpack really briefly is, if I am the managing broker and I got agents, right? And we see this on our platform, right? Where they may be engaging with leads that, they're trying to engage with lead lists and trying to call and stuff like that. And that's not going to be happening anymore. How do I protect myself from all of the class action lawsuits that are taking place? What are some things that, you're seeing out there already to just kind of put the guardrails in place so I don't have an independent agent trying to generate business? They want to sell, but ultimately we have to make sure we're thinking of those at the top of the top. What are you seeing there to just guide those that they're fearful from an operational standpoint?
Well, I think everyone needs to understand, first of all, don't be afraid. Fear is the wrong response here, right? It's just get empowered and start doing things right. And before you can do things right, you have to understand that, so January 26th, 2025, right? That's the deadline. We have to understand what that deadline means and then work backwards, right? What that deadline means is, as of that day, any call made with regulated technology, we'll talk about that here in a second, any call, right, that requires express written consent has to have the one-to-one consent that we're talking about. So that means if you try to call a lead on January 26th that you bought a week ago, and at the time you bought it, that was a valid lead, you could call it. But today, January 27th, 2025, you cannot, right? Mm-hmm. What does that mean? That means if you aren't buying one-to-one leads now, every single lead you have has a shelf life, right? Every single lead you are buying today expires, absolutely, as a matter of fact and law, expires January 26, 2027. These leads should have an expiration date on them so that you understand that. Now, I think a lot of folks buying leads are like, that's okay, I only call my leads for 90 days, right? But many folks like to have a lead pipeline, and they'll call, sales cycle, as you said, for real estate, it could be very long, right? And so you really today, if you're listening to the sound of my voice, if you're hearing me in July and August and September of 2024, you want to be thinking, man, I should be buying these leads that are one-to-one. If you're hearing my voice in October, November 2024, it's already too late. You need to be buying leads that are one-to-one compliant right now. And of course, if you're hearing me in 2025, well, hopefully you already know about this, because otherwise you're getting sued. So this is happening, right? And your level of compliance is going to depend on how quickly you act. And come January 27, 2025. It's like the grasshoppers of the world. What was the old cartoon? Remember, like the grasshopper would just like fiddle around. The mice were working hard. Just like deep from my my memory banks of like the 80s cartoons that I used to watch. I don't know, as a kid. But if you're fiddling away, right, and not paying attention to this, come January 27th, 2025, the cupboards are going to be bare, right? So you've got to start thinking about this now. Now, this is challenging, right? Because there's not a whole lot of lead suppliers out there that are currently complying with one-to-one, right? Mm-hmm. So it's time for folks that are buying leads to start agitating around this, right? And again, I'm the president of a trade organization of lead sellers and lead buyers that work together. And in other verticals, right, insurance vertical, mortgage, right, the big boys, lending trees of the world, they're all over this, right? They're already coming to market with their one-to-one solutions. Come September, October, the market's going to be flooded with one-to-one leads, which is good. That's good. But in the real estate vertical, right, because there's only a handful of really big players, I haven't really seen much movement yet. That's not to say it's not going to happen. But if you're a lead buyer and it's July, August, September, October, November 2024, you got to be on these guys saying, where are my one-to-one leads? Because come January, those leads are dead, all of them. Now, They're
Yeah.
dead from the perspective of regulated technology. And this is something that everyone needs to understand also, which is there's two paths to compliance here, right? One is get a lead that complies with the one-to-one rule, which is what we've been talking about this whole time. But there's another path, which is if the number is not on the D&C list, right? You've got a lead and it's, let's say it's 120 days old and it's not on the D&C list and it doesn't comply with the new one-to-one rule, but you still want to contact that consumer. You can use manual technology. Now, what does that mean? It's tough to say because the regs are always moving around, but this, I mean, you can use this, right? You can pick up this phone one-to-one, don't use any fancy workflow tools. Don't use any kind of apps on there that are going to like tee anything up. Just pick up the phone, dial the number and call them, right? That is still going to be allowed on the old leads on January 27, 2025, if the number is not on the D&C list. Now, if that number is on the D&C list, okay, there's a risk. The new rule that we were talking about only applies to regulated technology. So it doesn't modify the D&C rules. However, just understand, everyone should know this. The AGs, the attorney generals, and some of these consumer groups, right, are arguing to the FCC and to the courts that the D&C rules also require one-to-one consent. So even though it's not what the reg says, that is an argument that's still being made. So in the eyes of some courts, probably everybody that's on the D&C and anyone that you're calling with regulated technology, you have to have that one-to-one consent come January. But again, if they're not on the D&C and you're just picking up the phone and calling them, right? Those old leads are still going to be available to you. But look, as you know, you can imagine, that takes away your ability to use regulated technology, and it's going to take away potentially a lot of folks on the D&C list. So it's better to start complying with that one-to-one rule and kind of making sure that these leads are going to be sufficient.
Yeah, there'll be ways. I mean, we've had some of our clients, right? They have databases of, that they've spent, hundreds and hundreds of thousands of dollars on. They got 100,000 contacts in their database. Cleaning that up, I think when you mentioned that leads have a shelf life, this isn't just leads, right? From, let me know, when I'm thinking about lead generation, we've talked Zillow, Realtor, those websites that are traffic builders, and then they trickle down to the sales folk. But also, if let's say, for example, I got an open house lead. Is that also part of it, right? I'm at an open house. I got my digital sign-in sheet or something along those lines. And have I collected? I need to have the one-to-one consent for those as well, right? Those are going to be applicable. So as we think about all these other lead sources that are out there, it's not just for the big boys that we're talking about. It's going to trickle down for those. What are you seeing for those that have? I mean, again, back to the 6-month time frame that we have. We got everybody that's laser focused on all of the changes in terms of handling, how do I handle the conversation with buyer representation and conversations with my clients? How do you think about layering this into just, how do I get the opt-ins first? Are you seeing anything where folks are using, because regulated technology, to your point, is still allowed to get that opt-in from the consumer? Where are they driving them? Are they driving them to their own branded website to get the opt-in there with the verbiage? Anything you could share there of just you've seen that, like, hey, if I were you right now, this is what I would be doing.
Yeah, and people are doing this. It's ironic because the commission is trying to stop outreach, right? And they're actually encouraging for the next 6 months, just like a ton of it. And the lights are going on for a lot of folks right now that, wait a second, I've got 100,000 people. I don't have valid consent to contact them come January. I better start blasting these folks and trying to get their consent. And so we are seeing a lot of folks using the text channel in particular with like links built in. Hey, update your contact preferences here. Please click here so we can continue to communicate with you come January. And again, if you've got valid express written consent today, you can do that, right? I mean, technically, you could even use like a pre-recorded call to, invite them to go to a website or something. Just be careful, obviously, because consumers are not expecting to receive, these kinds of calls for the purposes of giving you additional consent. So even if these calls are perfectly legal, the consumer might not enjoy them, and you might end up losing potential clients. First. Second, if you happen to be calling a wrong number, keep in mind, right, your consent is only valid if the person who you are calling has provided you the consent. That number changes hands, right? You're calling, some stale leads. You got 100,000 names in your database. half of them are from over a year ago, right? That's 50,000 people whose phone numbers might have changed hands, and you're contacting the wrong number, and that is $500 per call when you're contacting the wrong number. There's a resource called the Reassigned Numbers Database. That's the Reassigned Numbers Database that the FCC puts out. You can use that. There is a charge. There's a fee to use it, but that will protect you because it will let you know if a number has been reassigned before you do an outreach to it. But generally speaking, Steve, you're right. I mean, you could right now use that technology to do an outreach to your leads to try to get folks to kind of opt into a higher level. Most of the folks I'm seeing are using text, but you can also use emails, right? Drive to site, of course, is good. But yeah, the one-to-one branded, get them to your own team's website, get them to your own website. But remember, even on your own website, right, even in the first party context, you have to comply with the one-to-one rule. So you have to make sure that you have the correct entity that is going to be providing the goods or services to the consumer, right? Who is that broker of record? It has to be on that form. And very clearly, the consumer has to be opting in with all the pieces of language, by the way. And I should have said this earlier. This is not just like, yes, I agree that Bob's Delaware LLC can contact me. No. There's 15 things that need to be on that form.
Yes.
We're calling it the Troutman Amin 15. There's a free form on our website, tcpaworld.com, where you can just Google Troutman Amin 15. Amin is AMIN 15, the number 15. And you'll find that form. It's a free template form so that you can set up your own website, right, with that one-to-one compliance. Now, in our template form, it's a third-party lead form, but it's very easy to convert that to a first-party lead form. But yeah, all those pieces of elements have to be on that form.
Yeah. We'll make sure that people have access to that. That's been our, we filter that out to individuals as they're thinking through, how to build their forms. A lot of it, our clients are, whether they're the CRM systems that are going to be critically important, right, to make sure that they're documenting the one-to-one consent, right? Those, I think we're already seeing a lot of that taking place so that they're filtering the information from the lead provider. And at the same time, to make sure that those, whether you're using an IDX website, that they're updating their forms appropriately so that you aren't trusting that it's all buttoned up. We want that done now because every lead that you're sourcing, to your point, right, it has a shelf life unless you, as a customer or the lead buyer in this case, has to reach back out to get the one-to-one consent. We want to make sure the lead providers are on top of that for them. So that's really, really helpful. So let's walk through. I mean, again, I know we got a little bit of time left, and if you have any critical things that we didn't cover here, but I want to talk through all of these really important dates because there's some other things that are taking place. I keep mentioning the 8/17 deadline with the NAR settlement, all the changes are taking place. That'll be a separate topic that we unpack. What is the other piece that your team is releasing in August regarding some of the, because some of these things, as we've learned, are always fluid as your team's going to work on your end and as changes are coming down with in Washington. So what's taking place in August for you guys that you're going to be releasing that we want our folks to also tune into?
Yeah, perfect. So again, as I mentioned, I'm the president of a trade organization called Reach. Reach is a organization of lead sellers and lead buyers. In fact, if any of you are like a big team that does a lot of buys, you should think about joining this organization. You can have a voice for the industry. You can help shape what the standards look like and the direction overall of this entire industry through this trade organization. You should think about that. But what Reach is doing is putting out standards, right? So, really kind of helping lead sellers to understand, especially the mid-sized lead sellers who are really looking for guidance and maybe don't have their own counsel and don't have like a really clear look in terms of how things should be done. Reach wants to help them and give them very clear specifics in terms of here's what you want to see on a web form. Here's how it needs to be formatted. Here's what is acceptable to responsible buyers in terms of what a lead flow should look like. And obviously, the Troutman Amin 15 is going to be part of that, but there's more behind that standard as well. And one of the key things that folks need to keep in mind, is that when you're talking about whose name is going to be on that form and in what order, it has to be done in a way that's objective. And this is something for lead sellers to understand is they can't just say, well, whoever pays me the most money, boom, I'm going to put that name right there on the lead. And that's who I'm going to connect that consumer with. Now, there might be scenarios where that's okay, where like the website's very clear, hey, we're just going to connect you with the one that's going to pay the most for your lead and they're going to take good care of you. But in most instances, the website actually at least suggests to the consumer that they're going to provide the consumer a connection with the right broker or the right agent for them. And if they're going to make those kinds of representations, even implicitly, they need to stick to that. So it can't just be, who's going to pay more. So when you're working with your lead partners now, don't be surprised if they're going to be a little bit more, they're going to have a few more questions for you than they normally would, because they want to have a better sense of what kind of services you provide, what you specialize in, what kinds of consumers you're really looking for, and how you can best serve them, so that when that consumer comes on the door, this goes back to having it be, the right catered solution for that consumer. They're going to see, hopefully, like, knock on wood, this is the way it's supposed to work. They're going to see the right agents for them. They're going to have a selection of maybe 3, 4, 5, all of whom are well qualified, not just paying more for the lead, well qualified to help that consumer. Consumer's going to pick who they want to work with. And again, these leads should come in and they should be converting at an incredible rate. But, again, there's just so many little ticky-tack rules around this. But again, the reach standards are there to help the folks that are selling leads to understand that these are all the requirements. And so once those standards come out, we're expecting them to be out following the August 5th meeting. So it's just a couple of weeks away. Again, this is recorded in July. You might be listening to it later. But as of right now, a couple of weeks away, August 5 is when we're expecting those standards to be out. So do keep out a lookout for them.
Yep. No, that's great. I mean, I didn't even think about who you're recommending. I mean, from my experience, it's pay to play. Whoever's paying the most is going to get their lion's share of the lead. So that's something that'll be interesting to just keep tabs on, if you think that also opens you up to potential lawsuit implications as well, as I'm thinking through the lead provider. So I hadn't even thought about that, Eric. So thanks for pointing that out. The other date that making people aware of is we're talking about gaining one-to-one consent. You got the shelf life of the leads, but also now you have the 10 DLC registration deadline of 12/1 that recently came out. And that's where basically any unregistered traffic, and that just basically means that your phone number and your campaign needs to be registered with the 10 DLC authorities. If it's not, they're cutting you off. You won't be able to send any messages, correct, Eric? And so in that case, what's that? Say it again. Go ahead.
It's just terrible. I mean, the authorities, right, is the campaign registry, TCR, which is a foreign-owned company. It's crazy. It makes this is where the czar gets very, very angry. It's very frustrating to me. No one should have to be registering their free speech before they communicate with a foreign-owned company. It's the most un-American thing I've ever heard in my entire life. Nonetheless, until somebody files some kind of TRO or something to prevent this from happening, which no one has done yet, and hopefully someone hires me to do it because I'd really love to. You're right? Yeah. Come December 1, hopefully your text message platform will handle that for you. It should be more of a headache for the text platforms than it is actually for the users of the platforms. But yeah, I mean, it's going to get tighter, right? It's going to get tighter from the lead flow. It's going to get tighter from an outreach perspective. Everything's kind of getting a little claustrophobic for those of you out there that want to do outreach.
Yeah, I just want to make sure people are aware, because we're the ones that are registering the numbers. So we're already seeing some of the timelines increasing to get those turned around. So I want to make sure that everybody here, if you are dependent upon any text messaging outreach, to make sure that you start that process, you reach out to us, but any of those platforms that you're already subscribed to, because again, if you're backing into this January deadline, the clock is ticking. And so making sure that your database is buttoned up, it's cleaned up. You mentioned just resources there that can help with making sure like the numbers are correct. We do a lot of the database cleanup on our end as well to make sure the database is clean. But again, if we don't have the one-to-one consent, our hands are tied. So let's get to work on getting that information all dialed in. You obviously have the challenges coming in Q3 and Q4 with all of the just operational challenges of talking with your clients and then our settlement. And now you're going to have this January, the kerfuffle of everything that's going to take place, and making sure that you can still engage with leads, you can still fill your pipelines, but again, making sure that everybody's out in front of it. So, Eric, this is fantastic. I know we'd love to do another one with you as these things are unpacking. I think we're a couple of weeks away to the Standards 2.0. We'd like to have you come on again for maybe a 20-minute just update for everybody that's in that space. But why don't we just cap it off? How do people get in touch with you? I mentioned a few resources, but what's the best way to reach out to you guys if any of the folks have a need on their end?
Yeah, sure. So you can visit any of our websites. We've got quite a few right now. TroutmanAmin.com is the formal law firm's website, TroutmanAmin.com. Our blog, TCPAworld.com, is where we break down every case every day. Tons and tons of updates and resources around the FCC's one-to-one rule. Really, really, I encourage you. It's totally free. You don't have to sign up. You don't have to do anything. Just go visit it and search around. There's thousands of articles, totally free. As you mentioned at the top of this, we've got a YouTube channel. It's at Deserve to Win, which is our YouTube channel. Hundreds of videos, many videos covering these topics. Just go root around, take a look. Lots of information available. And then last, we just launched a new website called youdeservetowin.com. This is like our lifestyle brand apparel website, and also has Deserve to Win, the podcast, and our magazine. So there's lots of cool content out there. Much of it is free. The magazine is not free. You should subscribe. You're going to like this magazine. But there's lots of ways to engage with us. Or you can just Google Troutman, czar, TCPA czar, any of these things. I'm very easy to find.
Yeah, I could tell everybody we are huge advocates of the site. I'll have to check out the new swag website as well. But again, I mean, every day you're posting something that's going on. I mean, we're seeing everybody else with getting sued out there. And this is just this, it's coming. I mean, it's already here, to tell you, but so many folks that we know in our ecosystem are blind to it, given what's kind of unfolding with the NAR settlement. So I hope everybody enjoyed the session. We'll circle back and update everybody on this, because it's critically important for those that have the outbound communication vehicles that they do. So Eric, very thankful for you coming on. As I mentioned before, it was a joy, getting to hang out with you throughout the time, and we appreciate everything you've done for us today. Okay.
Absolutely, man. It was fun. Thanks.